with that, it's my pleasure to introduce for our first panel the Honorable Sherry Goodman, who will be moderating a session on sustainability and climate considerations in national security planning. Sherry has been a leader in environmental, energy, and climate security since she first served as the first Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security. She currently serves as the Secretary General of the International Military Council on Climate and Security and is a board director at the Atlantic Council. I should also mention that Sherry recently published her new book on the topic, Threat Multiplier, Climate, Military Leadership, and the Fight for Global Security. That book will be available for y'all to pick up during our lunch session. So please do. She has a copy. There we go. So please do check that out. But for now, Sherry, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Reed. Can you all hear me? Yes. Okay, hey, great. Thank you. Reed, that was lovely. Landon, you just do an outstanding job here, so really, I want to hats off to you. Really excellent. Admiral Ellis, really terrific to have you here. This is really a spectacular conference. I've been involved with the Veterans Advanced Energy Conference really since its launch. I've been on the board here at the Atlantic Council for quite a long time, and you all, many of you are my heroes, and I tell your stories in my book. So I hope you will buy it. So we have 3 panelists today who are in my book, Admiral McGann and Meredith Berger and Joe Bryan. Of course, Jake and Roger merit being in the book, but that'll be maybe the next book. And then 3 of the former Veterans Advanced Energy Fellows, their stories about energy and climate on the front lines of warfighting today is all about, this is the story. And why I love this conference is because it really reflects, as Fred Kemp likes to say, the inflection point that is the convergence of national security, climate, and energy. And that's been the story of both my career, and I think many of you who are now working in this space want to see a better world, want to see a more secure future as we confront a variety of threats around the world, including climate as a threat multiplier and moving toward energy resilience and reliability. And nobody better than this panel to really kick it off on sustainability and climate considerations in national security planning. So I'm going to give just a little brief intro on each one as I ask them to sort of kick off the first question, but really kick off, I really want to start with the Honorable Meredith Berger, because she's now serving as the Assistant Secretary of Navy for Energy, Installations, and Environment. We love having Meredith. Meredith and I do a lot of things together now, and she's been a great leader in the Navy in a variety of ways. But I actually think the most spectacular thing you need to know about Meredith is that she just threw out the first pitch at the Yankees game during Climate Week. Okay, wouldn't we all like to do that? And they said climate readiness is mission readiness. So that is really a hallmark of where we are today. So I'm going to kick it off. Meredith, can you first talk to us about how you think about climate and sustainability and national security planning in the Navy today?
Absolutely, and Sherry, thank you for the shout out. And I have to say, this is one of the best panels. So kudos to Landon, because these are people I have learned from, worked with, and continue to yield outcomes together with. So it is pretty cool to be sitting in the middle of this group. Sherry, climate readiness is mission readiness is what we talk about at the Department of the Navy, teeing off of climate as a threat multiplier. And so we think about how we engage this across the continuum. And so you talked about being at New York City Climate Week, but I'll put it in context briefly, and I know we'll have more of a chance to speak, but especially being at Climate Week New York City last week, there are a lot of places where we were talking about profits and losses, quarterly earnings statements, how we're going to meet goals. And as I sat among other chief sustainability officers, I had the chance to tell them, and this is going to resonate with this group, I think, that we speak in a different currency when we talk about sustainability in the Department of the Navy. This is life and death. This is who comes home and how and why. In Iraq and Afghanistan, for every 50 convoys of fuel, we had a Marine that was killed or wounded. This is logistics, and this is warfighting advantage. And so that is why we are making investments in energy and water, making sure that we are taking climate action by making sustainable choices and investments, because it's looking out for the next sailor or Marine. And I'll include my sister services here. It is the next soldier, airman, guardsman. Those are the people that we're looking out for. And so that's what it means to incorporate sustainability into mission. It's mission first and mission success. And as I know there are a lot of veterans in the audience here today, it's how we see people create that foundational connection to what it means to assure mission first. And even as you go out and do other things post-service, it's how you keep your stake and tie to a personal investment in national security as we look at some of the actions that we can take. So I'll pause there, but that's how we're thinking about it.
Thank you very much, Meredith. Admiral McGinn, Denny, you both held the position that Meredith now held in a prior administration. You had a long career in the Navy, but can I say your most important job was you were one of the early members of the CNA Military Advisory Board on Climate Change and National Security, which really launched this field connecting climate, energy, and national security. So could you sort of explain to the audience kind of the through line between that connection and your own career in that?
Thank you. Sherry. I just want to start with a shout out to Dan Mish. Dan got this whole thing started, Veterans Advanced Energy. I remember being up at Boston University, however many years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, when we had the first kickoff, and Dan was and he did it pretty much pro bono, based on how strongly he felt about this initiative, and it has grown into this partnership with the Atlantic Council. It's really fantastic. So, Dan, if you're watching over there in España, well done. Thank you. Our energy security, and we can think of this nationally and also internationally, but our energy security, our economic security, and our environmental security are inextricably linked. You can't do anything really in any one of those without really carefully considering the effects on the other. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we didn't have to worry about climate change? Hey, drill baby drill, get the shovels going on pulling that coal out of the ground. Economically fantastic, energy security, great. But there's this little thing called climate change. And oh, by the way, it's not just global climate change and warming, it is regional and local environmental quality as well. So if you think about energy security, economic security, and environmental security as pillars that underpin our overall national security, quality of life, and literally our societal, family, and individual health, it's a good way to think about it. And it gives you the context in which you want to do things like advance the speed of and the scale up of transitioning off of an economy that's primarily dependent on fossil fuels. I've had many discussions with folks that are in the fossil fuel business, and I always make sure I say, this is not a bunch of bad people. The United States security and our economic wealth are very much dependent upon what fossil fuels have done with us. So we can't forget that. But at the same time, enter the phenomenon of climate change and global warming, greenhouse gases. It's past time, in fact, to change. So the challenge then becomes, how do we advance our energy portfolio, change it in ways that take into consideration the absolute need for economic viability and security, and do it in a way that is affordable, reliable, resilient, and something that can not be so disruptive that we end up becoming warring tribes inside the nation as well as internationally. We need to figure out ways, and I think Admiral Ellis pointed this out very well in his remarks. You get people in a room and they talk about various things like environmental security, energy security, economic security, they can get some things done very, very effectively. This isn't a zero-sum game. You can, in fact, address the most pressing challenges of climate change and do it in a way that is absolutely wonderful for economic security. We're seeing some initial phases of this in the IRA and the basic creation of industries, clean energy industries and IT industries in this country that are going to benefit economic development throughout the states, true globally as well. So that's a little bit of context that we need to consider all of these factors, environment, energy, and economy, in a broad sense, and as we try to accelerate and scale up our transition to new forms of energy.
Thank you so much, Denny. And I want to move to Jake now, who has just joined the White House as the National Security Council's Senior Director for Climate and Energy. He's held many jobs in government, including most recently at DFC and many other portfolios. And right now, Jake, you're at the crucible of energy and climate planning for national security. So can you say a little bit about what that portfolio means, particularly for these veterans? And if you want to talk about how you're dealing with the Ukraine energy challenge, too, I think this audience would be particularly interested.
Thanks, Sherry. Thanks a lot. At the crucible in the White House and in pole position for book number 2 with Roger. I think that we have the right of first refusal here, and I am really thrilled about the book, and congratulations, and I can't wait to pick one up. I will definitely circle back to your question. I want to just say thank you to you, Sherry, for your leadership, to Admiral McGinn. One of my first experiences in government was serving in the White House Office of Energy and Climate Change during the first term of the Obama administration, which was sort of the first iteration of something that has now become a much more robust operation inside the White House that extends into nearly every single office when you think about these inextricable linkages of climate, energy, security that you spoke about. And it's just been remarkable to see the recognition of that concept as it has become built into the structure of our government and the way that our security architecture works. That is because of your leadership and because you had the courage to raise your hand early on, when both of you, when it wasn't necessarily in the mainstream. So, well, thank you. It's just such an honor to be here today among such a wonderful group of veterans. I feel completely awed and humbled by your service. And now, having had 6 weeks to sit in the crucible, having a new appreciation for what that really means. So thank you. When I took this job, I came to the White House from an investment and a finance perspective, thinking about sort of how to bring U.S. government public finance to bear on some of the most challenging and strategic markets around the world. That remains an enormous area of our focus, because I think that in addition to sort of the real comparative advantage that the United States has around the world in terms of projecting its military power, the other critical comparative advantage that we bring is the innovation and the scale and the speed of our private sector. And when you look at so many of the challenges that we're facing today, sort of within the context of geopolitical competition, but also these types of transnational challenges that we have, including climate change, we can't achieve our goals without doing that in partnership with the private sector, with companies like GE, that is literally there on the front lines of so many of the most fragile and conflict areas around the world, providing infrastructure, stability, security into those markets, in addition to, as Meredith put it, the profit-seeking motive of trying to drive revenue and sales and growth. I think one of the areas where this has really come into view for all of us is in the context of energy security in Ukraine. I had the opportunity when I was at DFC to travel to Kyiv and meet with the private sector as well as the Ukrainian state-owned enterprises that are working to keep its grid up and running. And I will never forget when you, first of all, to get to Kyiv, you take a 10-hour train overnight from Poland. You arrive in the morning, and I'll never forget landing at the train station, making our way to the grid company, a company called Ukrenergo. And after 10 minutes in the boardroom, this very nice boardroom with the CEO of the company, the air raid sirens started to sound. And we decided a few minutes later, I think some of us thought that took a little while to make that decision, to go down into the bunker where hundreds of employees from Ukrenergo were doing the daily work of keeping the lights on. Ukrenergo was a target of Russian drones and missiles because of the fact that it was providing an essential security service. It was keeping the grid up and running, keeping the economy up and running, keeping revenues, tax bases, jobs, people warm at home. And the Russians know this. That's why over the last 9 to 12 months, they have taken out 50% of Ukraine's grid. 9 gigawatts of generating capacity has come offline. We received intelligence from the Ukrainians a couple of weeks ago that now the Russians are looking at the substations and the switch yards that connect the nuclear power stations to the grid. The nuclear power stations, which are, of course, the main source of stabilizing voltage, frequency, and ancillary services to the entire grid. So when you think about the question of energy, climate security, it comes into view in Ukraine. And the last thing that I'll just note here, and turn it back to you, Sherry, is that among the very inspiring parts of meeting with the Ukrainians to talk about how to keep things up and running at a basic level is the fact that they are also focused on building out a clean energy grid that is decentralized and decarbonized and is built for the future of Europe, that is in line with their vision for an integration into not just the European grid, but into the European Union, so that they can become energy exporters of clean energy to the West. They can power all of the new industry that we're going to see coming out of Poland and Bulgaria and Germany in building not just the clean energy components and the electric vehicles, but also the critical minerals that we need to power all of that. And Ukraine sees itself as squarely within that vision, partially because a decentralized, decarbonized grid is one that is less vulnerable to attack from Russians who still have the maps of the Soviet Union era grid of Ukraine and are able to identify the places to target next. So I think it was an education for all of us in terms of the grit and the creativity of the Ukrainians. Now it's just an all-out, nonstop job to keep these structures protected, to keep new resources coming online, and it's a commitment that in this crucible that we revisit hourly and daily.
Wow. Well, Jake, if that isn't a story of inspiration out of the ashes of war comes a decarbonized, a decentralized, more sustainable energy grid. So that is really remarkable. We hope that happens. We hope that we're there, and this group is there, among others, to help see that future through, and that's exciting. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you then also, you really kind of teed up Roger next, the important role of the private sector. Now, I do have to say here to all our veterans, Roger was at EPA when I was at DOD in the 90s, and he reminded me he was one of those nice lawyers over there. We actually liked him. He didn't take us to court all the time, and he partnered with us as we were in that era of cleaning up military bases and doing all the environmental things we were doing in DOD in the 1990s. But Roger, you've had a very diverse and varied career yourself. in many different sectors, and now you're at GE, and you're right at the forefront of helping supply that innovative clean energy for the future. So talk about how that's working and how you're working with federal partners in that space, please.
Well, Sherry, thank you very much. And I was proud of the work that I tried to do running defense for the Department of Defense at EPA and trying to help them get things done, things that they were trying to do very well intentioned. And it was an honor that they recognized that I do not have a military background. So it's a real privilege and honor for me to be here. My career has been on environmentalism, climate change, energy, sustainability. And I think one of the proudest moments or days I've ever had was the Department of Defense offered to take me out to an aircraft carrier, flew me out, let me spend a few days with them so I could really see and appreciate what you do. And I always walked away from that so inspired. And it's why it's such a privilege for me to be here, that just really, from an outsider, appreciating your commitment, your mission, your talents, your skills, has always made me want to fight for this cause. So it's a real privilege to be here. And I want to maybe from the private sector perspective, go back to your opening comment about the confluence of energy security, climate change, and national security. Because from our perspective, the company that helps produce 25% of the world's energy, we are the most diverse portfolio of energy technologies all around the world and breakthrough technologies for the future. That's exactly what we're seeing. I said I've spent my 30-year careers kind of on the environmental side of things, climate change and energy. My last 3 years have been in liaison with the White House, the National Security Council, Department of Defense, our friends in the UK and the EU on national security. And if someone had told me a few years ago, like my job description would include national security, I wouldn't have believed it. But now it's kind of the driving force for what I do, and this intersection of energy and national security has really been a game changer, I think, and something I really admire this administration for really elevating people like Jake, elevating this intersection, because I've come to appreciate how important it is. And there's three things I've seen that really drives this, and it's kind of themes we've already talked about, but maybe bringing in with a little private sector perspective. The first is the push for energy security. So we've known that climate change is an important thing to address. We haven't quite kept up with the pace of the urgency. It's been moving along, but not quite at the pace we all probably would want. But energy security the last few years has been a fundamental game changer towards innovation and investments that address climate change. And I think Jake hit on what kind of was the catalyst. It was Ukraine. We were very proud of our role in Ukraine. As Jake said, Russia tragically has targeted civilian energy infrastructure. So when kids can't turn the lights on and parents can't access their jobs or healthcare, we're going to take that really seriously. So we've been partnering with the Ukraine energy minister on how we can place strategic assets across the country that make the grid more resilient and less vulnerable. So we make turbines that you can put on a trailer. They can power about 100,000 homes. You can move them around strategically. Russia doesn't know where they are. You can move them around, and you can see the strategic advantage there. So we've been thinking, I've been working with his energy secretary who acts like a Department of Defense secretary, because that's what he has to do. But beyond Ukraine, this was a real wake-up call for the rest of the world. And this is where the calls started to come in from the White House with the blocked caller ID and so on, because we wanted to get as much equipment to Ukraine as we could. It was our biggest priority, but even we were surprised. We don't have this sitting on shelves. We don't have transformer equipment sitting around in inventory somewhere in a warehouse or turbines. We have years and years of backlog because of this electrification imperative. So it was a wake-up call for us, I think for the administration, for the UK, for the EU. Like, we need a strategic imperative here to have energy security and a resilient supply chain. So we've been working in very close collaboration in that, and that is something that is a priority day to day on how we solve for this. And it's not just war, it's energy, it's weather events like we saw in North Carolina, it's the growing demand for electrification, and how can we think from an energy security perspective. The second thing is also something Jake touched on, which is this administration has really embraced the concept of public partnerships and private partnerships. And that has been a game changer, just this notion of working together in the same direction towards accelerating the types of investments we're making. So going back to energy security, we have a factory in Shreveport, Louisiana, that produces critical grid equipment. The DOE's helped us with a $28 million grant to increase capacity there, which is good for energy security, national security. We have a factory in Pensacola, I'd love to tell you about it, where 20% of our workforce is veterans. And the Inflation Reduction Act has helped us hire make $20 million in investments and hire more veterans to produce onshore wind turbines that we use here in the US. Again, energy security, national security, helping veterans. So that's only been because of the partnership, would not have happened without the partnership with the public sector. And then the third thing goes to the core of national security. And this is where it gets really interesting, because what we have seen is where climate change used to be seen as a competitive disadvantage, now countries see it as a competitive opportunity. It's their Silicon Valley. So all these countries are betting on investing in climate change technology and innovation as their future. And we're effectively, I think, in a once-in-a-generation space race on who's going to innovate this technology. The world needs energy. The world needs this technology. The question is, who's going to do it? Small modular nuclear reactors, carbon capture, sequestration, all the energy that's required to keep up with artificial intelligence, to onshore semiconductor manufacturing. So this is a here and now issue of urgency, being able to meet the demands of energy for national security, because someone's going to do it. Who's going to do it? Who's going to lead here? And who's going to innovate the next generation of technologies that are ultimately going to solve this? So that's the confluence we're seeing. It's all good for climate change. I didn't talk much about climate because all these three things get you towards climate change solutions, but it's coming out of energy security, the catalyst of private-public partnership, and the increasing focus on national security. And very thankful for this administration and, again, our friends elsewhere who have been willing to kind of work with us with this lens to solve for these like geopolitical problems.
Thank you. That was brilliant, Roger. What a great master class there. So thank you so much. Joe, and I have a follow-up question, but I want to get to Joe, who, among many hats you've worn, you served as the Secretary of Defense Climate Advisor. You were also in the Navy. We got like a critical mass of Navy here. What would we say? We are purple. We love all the services. But you also had previously served in the Department of Navy, Joe, and you have really been working to align climate, energy, national security goals in the Department of Defense, reflected in some of the work that we've just already discussed. But reflect on that and kind of where you see the critical innovations happening in the future that we should be aware of. Excuse me.
Sure. Well, thanks, Sherry, and thanks for writing the book, too. I think it's a great contribution to thinking around this. You know, I guess I'm betting cleanup will carry forward the Yankees analogy. Aaron Judge is having a great year. Aaron Rodgers is not having such a great year. Aaron Judge is having a great year. So my year isn't quite as good, so lower your expectations for the cleanup here. I guess where I'd start is where both Jake and Roger left off, and this is, I think you said something, Sherry, about the change in thinking in Ukraine around the importance of distributed generation, addressing risk in the grid by changing your approach to thinking around what assets you might use and where you might put them and how you might configure your grid. That is remarkable. But the truth is, it also just kind of makes sense, right? That's actually where we are. There's an inclination by some these days, and I think we see it in the public discourse quite a bit, to suggest that there's somehow competition between what's good for military capability and what's good for climate. And that somehow this is, I think Denny referred to it as a zero-sum game. And I think what we know, and what many folks in this room know, and what we believe is that's fundamentally flawed way of looking at the problem. Fundamentally flawed, and frankly wrong. And I think many of us believe that, but I think the belief is less important than the fact. And the fact is that the things we do to improve combat capability within the Department of Defense, and the things we do to improve, mitigate our contribution to climate change and also mitigate some of the risk that we carry because of climate change, those two things are exceptionally well aligned. And I'll just give you a couple examples, and then we can continue the conversation with the group. I mean, you think about something like blended wing body aircraft, and I do some work in this space. Blended wing body, you know, the Air Force issued a contract for the development of blended wing body aircraft, fundamentally changing the way aircraft are built. That aircraft, possibly tanker or cargo, and also a huge commercial application opportunity for it, 50% less fuel burn. So when we think about military capability, that airplane, if it's successfully built and flown, can deliver twice the capability, twice the payload at the same range, or twice the range with the same payload. Now, I just ask us, does that matter? It certainly matters in the commercial sector because airlines pay a lot of money for fuel, but does it matter to DoD when you think about the tyranny of distance in the Pacific? I think so, and the Air Force thinks so. And advancing that technology and being a leader, the United States being a leader on that, is critical for our military capability, also critical for our industrial competitiveness as China pursues some of these same platforms. So that really matters. And you don't have to talk about climate to care about the United States taking a lead on that technology. Hybridization, electrification of tactical vehicles. Does that matter? Well, I don't know. Last time I checked, hybrid tactical vehicles bring with them silent watch, low heat signature, super impressive torque. Look, many of us, I don't know, I've driven a lot of electric vehicles. I assume folks in the room have. Do those things matter on the battlefield? I kind of think they do. And everyone who we've taken out from DoD and the services to drive one out at GM or elsewhere thinks they matter too and have a place in to build our military capability. And the fundamental technology underpinning that capability is energy storage, is batteries. And what we know now is we're in a global competition for who's going to dominate the battery industry of the future. And the United States, because of the IRA and because of bipartisan infrastructure law, is doing better than we were a few years ago. But we are still in a competition for our lives on this technology, and this will define the future. And it matters not just for the climate, because electrification, I think, has underlying climate benefit, but it matters for our ability to deploy combat capability for our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. And it matters for the U.S. industrial competitiveness, in particular with China. So I think that, notwithstanding the current political debate, I think it's important to recognize that we can do two things at one time, right? These two things are not incompatible, and in fact, they're self-reinforcing. And I think we need to recognize that, and our politics and our policies should reflect that reality.
That was a great brief. And apologies for coughing in the interlude. But we've got a couple of really good questions here, so I want to get to those. And Kevin Doffing, and thank you, Kevin, for your leadership here. You ask, how is the Defense Department procurement and financing being leveraged to provide financial security for private sector manufacturers to expand or restore production? And what obstacles need to be overcome for the department to accelerate private industry and defense partnerships? One of you guys want to take that?
Could you say that question one more time?
I'm
I see the question?
I'm going to let somebody else read. Excuse me.
All right. It's the top one, right?
The bottom one.
Bottom one. Okay.
So I can speak a little bit to the procurement side. Look, I think one of the things that the bipartisan infrastructure law and the IRA have done really well is incentivize. I'll talk about this in the context of batteries. I do some work in the battery space. We've done a really good job of injecting capital into important markets like batteries, upstream and downstream. And I think we're seeing now already some of the results of that in our industrial development out in the States. And we're going to see more in the coming years. I mean, DOE just announced another round of battery grants. And that's great to build the capacity here to compete. I think on the defense side, in order to keep a business in business, you got to procure, right? You have to buy things. So companies love undiluted capital, but they love sales more. And if you're going to raise money in the private sector to build your next factory, you can rely on DOE and government money, but you're also going to have to raise private money. And those private sector funders want to see you sell stuff. So I think the Department of Defense and the U.S. government has to figure out a way to make sure that the things we're building have markets to sell into. And I think that's critical to our ability to compete globally in clean technologies. And that's just one example in the battery space. I think that DoD, we've done a good job in government to fund things and to provide support to grow industries, but I do think we have to procure. I think GE can't stay in business if no one's buying their engines.
And if I may say, I think we're off to a good start. We're appreciative of the momentum we've had in a short amount of time. I think DoD, DOE, the administration, they've been very helpful in implementing these acts and these funding sources, one, to help us build factories. I talked about the capacity we're already seeing. and also the innovation side. We can't build everything today. Some days we have to be in the labs innovating small modular reactors, carbon capture. These are all national defense imperatives. So the partnership has been good. I would say we're in early days, and so we're just getting started. We need kind of, I said something one time in one of our internal meetings about Ukraine, and it kind of surprised people, but we need a war set mentality when it comes to strategic reserves of transformers and critical grid equipment. We have to approach it with that lens. I think the government gets that. The private sector needs to do it as well. Part of the question asked about what are some of the obstacles. Now, I'll go back to my EPA days. The reality is it's permitting, it's the ecosystem, it's jobs, and so that's where veterans are a huge help. Like we love hiring as many veterans as possible because they jump right in and they're able to help us with the jobs and the upskilling and so able to do so many different things and kind of reinvent themselves to do what we need. So I'm confident that the veterans can help us on the jobs, but permitting and that kind of regulatory infrastructure continues, I think everybody would agree, the #1 obstacle to really moving at the pace that we need to do to address these issues.
The phrase comes to mind, dual-use technology. We've been doing commercial off-the-shelf technology use in the military for decades, literally. I am reminded of Marines in remote forward operating bases in Afghanistan using commercial off-the-shelf solar panels and batteries to do things like silent watch and to reduce somewhat the long supply chain for diesel oil. I think that a mindset on both sides, public and private, where can we develop technology that has dual use to create the markets that Joe was talking about, to make that demand pull. And I think that really is important to get beyond the not invented here mindset, if it exists anywhere, and say, hey, what can we do that is mutually beneficial to our national security in a military sense, but also has great market potential as well.
And I'll just add, Sherry, quickly. To bring some specificity to it, the Department of Defense is traditionally a market driver, and so please look to us for requirements. Keep your eyes peeled for an interesting RFI coming from the Department of Navy next week, everybody. Also, please respond and help us know where we can work together. We've got a lot of authorities that we can use. Land is one of our richest assets, and so as we look to drive energy forward, it is with that dual use in mind. And so we are not looking to be the only ones with the lights on, but if we've got to respond to a mission necessity, we want to have the lights first. And so that's how we are driving towards making sure that we've got defense community resilience all of the time, and should we deviate from normal, that we have the resources that we need to respond and assure our national security mission. Something that I know everyone is very familiar with, but energy performance contracts, enhanced use leases, other transactional authority allows us to move with more speed to get to the output and outcomes that we are trying to drive towards, which is that integrated energy resilience. This is a place where, as Jake and others alluded to, if we have a disruption in our civilian energy sector, then we have a disruption in our national security mission. And so it is one and the same, and I'll add that this starts broader than these authorities and opportunities as well, because as Joe was talking about, it is how we're taking every single harm off the table. And so starting at biodiversity and ending at institutional ethos, that's how we make sure that we are combating that climate threat and actually assuring mission at the end of the day and creating the advantage, as several people noted as well. But it really is a continuum of opportunities, but please help us by listening to our requirements, because those are going to be requirements that set the pace for what needs to be done.
Well, thank you. That was great. And since you talked about defense setting requirements for future energy, and I think it's come up already in this conversation about the call at the climate conference last year was to triple global nuclear power by 2050. And that would require a substantial increase in civilian nuclear energy. And right now, China and Russia are right out there selling nuclear power around the world. I know the Department of Defense is already leading in some of those, in testing out some advanced and microreactor technologies. But can you speak a little bit to the demand signal and need for the next generation of nuclear to align with mission needs and how that will help with American energy security.
This is carbon-free electricity, and that is what we are trying to make sure we are including to the maximum. If we can draw down those emissions, then we secure both our climate future and our energy future, and so certainly that is in the mix for the entirety of DoD. My sister services have moved forward. Keep your eyes out for us. And then otherwise, it is certainly a place that we can do joint efforts, make sure that we're integrating what that looks like across the Department of Defense, each bringing kind of the best expertise and making sure that we are including that as part of our energy security and energy future. So
For
absolutely in the
about
mix.
60 years, the Department of the Navy has been hiding small modular reactors. They wrap them in things called submarines and aircraft carriers. And I think that dual use certainly may not be exactly the same design, but this idea of joint use, working with utilities, for example, TVA, Dominion, Southern Company, to push this technology forward and to spread the risk and also spread the reward for getting small modular reactors up to a scale that provides clean energy base load.
An important distinction there, actually. So not the same technology that we can push forward. So I just want to make sure that while there is a tremendous history of stewardship and safety with naval propulsion and reactors, want to make sure that the technology approach, manning, resourcing, and the infrastructure that will come along with it is distinct, but certainly blended in source. I just want to make sure we don't mix the technology.
Absolutely. We can't take them off the shelf or out of the submarines and aircraft carriers.
Roger, I know you're working in this space as well. And
Super optimistic here. This is a technology, thanks to the collaboration with DoD, DOE, we're going to lead on small modular reactors. We share the same goal that we have to lead, we will lead. We will have our first small modular reactor commercialized this decade. And it's not just an issue for the United States, it's an issue for Europe, for the UK, which is working in close collaboration, and other strategic partners globally. So everybody gets the stakes here are high, and this is one of the areas where I'm the most optimistic.
okay, Jake, you get the last word.
Okay, well, I'll just come in on this because I had the opportunity to visit the GE small modular reactor virtual model that they have in Wilmington, North Carolina, which is connected to GE's nuclear fuel production facility. In addition to getting completely blown away by the technology and the prospect of its proliferation for civil nuclear power all over the world, one thing that I learned is that a small modular reactor is actually not small. It's enormous. You look in this virtual reactor, and you're looking at something akin to a medium-sized high-rise. But the thing that I do want to point out, not to end on a down note, but I do think that we all need to be a little bit sober about the issue that came up in a separate part of this discussion, which is how do you think about the convergence of this sort of new clean energy industrial base that is creating jobs and economic competitiveness and export capacity for the United States, and our defense industrial base to power that and to help jumpstart and catalyze it? Because right now, it's really hard to sell a small modular reactor to a place like Poland or Romania or South Africa or Indonesia. It doesn't compete on the commercial market with a solar panel or a series of wind turbines. I think one of the things that I learned in this visit, which was quite compelling, is that when you look at the levelized cost of new nuclear power, not at the first of its kind, but at the nth of its kind, and you pair that with renewable energy, recognizing the significance of baseload nuclear power generation capacity for reliability and resource adequacy, then you can start bringing the overall systems costs down. And I thought that type of creativity that GE in this case was bringing into the discussion about how to think about a systems approach to pricing and cost competitiveness was really important, but it's not the kind of thing that you hear every day in the commercial conversation. So I think we still have a little bit of a ways to go to sort of tell that story and deliver that message so that we can drive contracts and sales and bring costs down. And we're excited to bring U.S. government resources to bear on this, whether it's DFC or XM or others. I'm really excited to get a coffee with Joe and Meredith so that we can think about how to bring the defense aspects of that to bear, because I think there's clearly and obviously a role for that as well.
And to close on an optimistic note, I think you've heard from all the panelists that there's going to be a lot of opportunities for veterans to work in and advance the clean energy transition as it advances our own national security. So let me thank all of our panelists for joining us today, and thank you all.